Ever wonder who really shapes the cities we live in? I mean, we talk about mayors, city councils, planners, but sometimes, beyond the official titles, some individuals wield such immense, almost unchecked power that they fundamentally redefine our world.
hmm
Today, we're diving deep into the story of one such figure, Robert Moses. He wasn't just a builder, he was, well, they called him the power broker, a man who sculpted New York City on a scale that's frankly almost unimaginable today.
It really is. His influence, his vision, his methods, they cast this long shadow and a legacy that still defines the metropolis and, in many ways, cities everywhere.
Absolutely.
And it's a truly monumental story. What's particularly fascinating, I think, is the unique nature of Moses's power. For much of his incredibly long career, Robert Moses held no public office.
Right, that's the key point.
He wasn't elected by anyone. He answered to no specific electorate. Yet he controlled these colossal projects that spanned decades.
Decades.
And this wasn't just influence like lobbying or something. It was a systematic, almost artful accumulation of authority that allowed him to bypass traditional democratic processes entirely. He became effectively, well, an unelected monarch of New York's physical landscape.
An unelected monarch. That's a powerful way to put it. And that's our mission today, isn't it? This deep dive, primarily guided by Robert Caro's amazing biography, the Power Broker Pulitzer Prize winner, by the way, alongside some other illuminating sources, we're going to explore exactly how Moses amassed and used that extraordinary self-made power. We'll look at the incredible ambition, the political genius behind his mega projects, and crucially, we'll confront the profound, often devastating human cost.
Yeah, that's unavoidable.
It's an uncomfortable truth, really, for us to face.
Yeah.
Great projects can emerge from ethically questionable means. We need to analyze those complex trade-offs between, the public good and individual rights that are just inherent in large-scale urban development. So buckle up, because we're about to explore a story that's a masterclass in power, ambition, and these enduring questions of who our cities are really for. Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start at the beginning. How did one man, operating largely outside elected office, achieve such dominion over one of the world's greatest cities? It sounds almost mythical, doesn't it? Like something out of history, not modern urban planning.
It does sound mythical, but it was meticulously engineered. It was like a blueprint for power consolidation.
Yeah.
Moses didn't just build roads and bridges. He built an institutional framework for his power, one designed to be virtually impregnable.
An institutional framework, okay.
His initial maneuvers, as Caro details them in The Power Broker, they really set the stage. They showcase his incredibly sharp strategic mind from a very early point in his career.
Like what kind of maneuvers are we talking about early on?
Well, we see this vividly in early political battles. For instance, his fierce conflict with the Republican majority and legislature, particularly around something called the Thayer Bill.
The Thayer Bill. Okay, what was that about? Sounds like a direct challenge.
Oh, absolutely was a direct challenge. This bill, championed by the Republican leadership, was designed specifically to segregate $6 million of a bond issue, basically targeting Moses's budding influence.
Trying to fence him in financially?
Exactly. It aimed to curtail his power by requiring Republican-controlled board approvals for practically every step of his parkland acquisition and construction. And to make it even more restrictive, it stipulated that all engineering and legal work for parks and parkways had to be done exclusively by Republican state officials.
Wow.
So in essence, this bill wasn't just about financial oversight. It was a brazen political maneuver, an attempt to surgically remove Moses's independence by forcing him to rely on his political rivals for every single step. They wanted to tie his hands completely.
Okay, so they were trying to box him in, strip him of his autonomy. Knowing Moses's reputation even early on, I can't imagine he just accepted that. How did he fight back? What does that tell us about his instincts?
No, he certainly didn't take it lying down. Even at this early stage, Moses showed this astonishing, almost uncanny ability to work behind the scenes. He leveraged his influence, probably through connections he'd already made, and his formidable ability to shape public opinion.
Right.
To get Governor Al Smith to veto that Thayer Bill.
He got the governor to veto it.
He did. It was a clear demonstration of his power, even without a formal office. Caro describes Moses at this time as, get this, that expert and abusive propagandist practiced in exciting the prejudices of the uninformed and a habitual defamer of the legislature.
Oof, that paints a picture. Sharp, aggressive.
Ruthless, even, from the very start. He understood how to weaponize public sentiment, how to attack his opponent's credibility, all to protect his turf and push his, well, ambitious agenda.
Okay, so he wins these battles, but here's where it gets really interesting for me. He didn't just win fights, he effectively created and shaped positions where his power became absolute. Tell us about that pivotal year, 1934. How did he manage that?
Right, 1934 was a masterclass in what you might call institutional capture and power consolidation. On January 19th, 1934, a critical piece of legislation, the Moses Bill, was signed. This bill made him New York's first citywide park commissioner.
Citywide, that's a big deal.
Huge. It gave him jurisdiction over all parks and parkways in all 5 boroughs, but that was just the opening act.
Just the beginning.
Oh, yeah. That very same day, he was sworn in. Soon after, he expertly leveraged vacancies that arose from corrupt Triborough commissioners. Their financial manipulations were apparently so blatant they got caught quickly and dismissed.
Convenient.
Very. And Moses secured his simultaneous appointment as Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the Triborough Bridge Authority.
Wow. So, park commissioner and head of Triborough.
And with his friend and loyal ally, George McLaughlin, appointed to the second vacancy, control of this absolutely crucial body, with its massive revenue potential and construction power, was firmly in his hands.
So he basically used a corruption scandal to install himself and his allies into these incredibly powerful positions. That's quite a maneuver.
It truly is. But then came an even more radical innovation, something that really shows his unique genius for power architecture. A new bill was introduced to create the Marine Parkway Authority.
Okay.
What was radical about this was that this new authority wouldn't be run by a traditional 3-man board like usual. No, this authority would have a sole member.
A sole member, just one person.
Just one. And guess who that member was designated as in the law?
Let me guess. The park commissioner of New York City.
Bingo. It directly codified his personal power into law, effectively removing any traditional checks and balances. It established its unprecedented level of individual control over vast public works.
That's astonishing.
The key insight here, I think, is how these seemingly minor administrative adjustments, when they're strategically implemented, can just dismantle democratic safeguards entirely. They centralize authority under a single unelected individual. It's kind of a chilling lesson in how vulnerable governance structures can be.
It really is chilling. So it's not always about the overt power grabs. Sometimes it's the subtle re-engineering of the system itself. He wasn't just designing bridges. He was designing the job description to fit his own ambitions, removing anyone who could question him.
Precisely. And this model of concentrated, almost personal authority was a stark departure from how most complex organizations are typically managed. You look at someone like Peter Drucker in Management Tasks, Responsibilities, Practices. He talks about how traditional top managements in large businesses usually have several top managements rather than one, for distributed leadership and checks.
Right, shared responsibility.
Moses actively worked against that. He worked to centralize power, ensuring there was only one top management in these authorities himself. He wasn't just managing projects. He was managing the very structure of governance around them, making sure it all pointed back to his singular vision and control.
Okay, so he built this incredible legal and institutional fortress. But beyond those frameworks, how did Moses maintain such widespread public support? And maybe more shrewdly, how did he control his political allies? It couldn't have been just the legal stuff, right? Public opinion, political loyalty. They're usually pretty fickle.
You're absolutely right. It was far more nuanced, more multifaceted than just the laws. Moses possessed this undeniable genius for public relations and a really deep understanding of the power of spectacle.
Spectacle.
He deployed this masterfully to portray himself, quite effectively, as a fighter for parks and against privilege.
Okay, the champion of the people.
Exactly. A classic example, and it really illustrates his showmanship, was the opening of the Picture Book Zoo for Governor Al Smith. Moses orchestrated this lavish, meticulously planned, incredibly child-friendly spectacle. Picture this. A 6-foot wooden picture book at the entrance.
Seriously, a giant picture book.
Yep. A lion and a gorilla unveiled from gift-wrapped boxes, trumpeters blaring, thousands of balloons released into the sky, high school bands marching up Fifth Avenue.
Wow.
He even got a little girl to hold a large gold key for Mayor LaGuardia to ceremonially unlock the zoo. This wasn't just an opening. It was sophisticated manipulation of public perception, creating this benevolent, almost magical image, linking him directly to public good, joy, progress. It was pure public adoration, carefully crafted.
It sounds almost like theater.
It was, and his reputation for honesty was also carefully cultivated. Caro points out that no one questioned Moses' honesty, which became a key defense, even when critics like Macy tried to label his associates as crooks. That image provided a powerful shield.
It sounds almost Machiavellian, really. Cultivating this public image while operating in the shadows. Was there any genuine altruism in it, do you think, or was it all calculation?
That's a vital question. Caro suggests it was probably a complex blend. Moses likely genuinely believed in his vision for public parks and infrastructure. He saw them as essential for the common good.
Okay.
But his methods for achieving that good often, well, lacked democratic niceties. The public relations genius was certainly a calculated tool to gather support and deflect criticism, allowing him to push through projects with fewer obstacles. It was maybe pragmatic, almost ruthless altruism. He was convinced he knew what was best, and he used every tool he had to make it happen.
So on one hand, the public champion, beloved by many, but on the other, operating in a much more shadowy way to maintain control over the politicians, not just the public. What were those private mechanisms of influence? How did he keep everyone in line?
Ah, yes. This is where the more insidious forms of control come in, the true power broker methods. He engaged in what some might call honest graft and personal favors, effectively acting as a ward boss of the highest precincts, but on a metropolitan scale.
A ward boss with citywide reach.
Exactly. He used the vast wealth of his public authorities, money from tolls, bonds, various revenue streams, to grant what Caro vividly describes as rich Christmas baskets.
Rich Christmas baskets. What does that mean? Favors.
Favors, appointments, contracts, maybe even direct financial benefits to key political figures. People like the DeSapios, the Shanahans, the Steingutts. This wasn't just about winning votes. It was a sophisticated, direct mechanism for ensuring compliance and loyalty. A system of political patronage that kept these influential figures in line for 3 decades, cementing his power base.
That's remarkable. It's like old school political machines, but operating on a much grander scale and crucially with public funds from these authorities he controlled. But what was the ultimate threat? How did he really ensure politicians stayed compliant? Favors are one thing, but
The true extent of this control and its chilling effectiveness is revealed in this private conversation Mayor Wagner had with Paul Scrivain back in 1961. Wagner, reflecting on his own dealings with Moses, warned Scrivain. He said, "Paul, my experience with Moses has taught me one lesson, and I'll tell it to you. I would never let him do anything for me in any way, shape, or form.
wow, never accept a favor.
Because," Wagner continued, "a day will come when God will reach back in his file and throw this in your face. Quietly, if that will make you go along with him, publicly otherwise. And if he has to, he will destroy you with it."
Bob Moses has these files. That is incredibly potent. It's almost blackmail, isn't it?
It certainly sounds like it. It makes you wonder how many times that happens, maybe on smaller scales, leveraging past favors. It's a testament to how power dynamics work, I suppose. And Scrivain, who had actually idolized Moses, apparently witnessed this exact pattern time and time again during battles later on, confirming Wagner's stark warning. This reveals the calculated, even ruthless side of Moses' power. It wasn't just built on grand gestures and public love, but on detailed personal leverage, a meticulous record of who owed him what.
It's like a real-life spy thriller, but the battleground is city planning, controlling information, knowing where the skeletons were buried. Just as powerful, maybe more so, than building bridges.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for us today, looking at how power works? It's this complex portrait, isn't it? A figure who mastered both the visible, celebratory levers of power and the invisible, coercive ones, made him almost unassailable for decades.
It means that the fair-appearing civilization, the grand projects, the public spaces we admire, can sometimes conceal what Louis Sullivan called a huge invisible man-trap, man-made.
A man-trap.
It reflects the hidden dangers in that kind of centralized, personally wielded power, where what looks beneficial on the surface can have these deeply manipulative and controlling undercurrents. It's a powerful lesson in how power can be consolidated and maintained, even without direct democratic accountability. It forces us to ask, how transparent are the power structures in our own communities? And how truly accountable are those who wield influence?
Okay, so we've understood the almost alchemical way Moses transformed influence into absolute authority. Now let's turn to the monumental canvas he worked on. What did this architect of unseen power actually build with his empire? What vision did he impose on New York City? His projects weren't just big, they were truly colossal.
Colossal's the word. His vision was fundamentally about large-scale functional urbanism, a complete reimagining of the city's arteries and lungs, you could say.
Arteries and lungs, I like that.
He prioritized the macro-level design, often brutally, at the expense of existing structures, existing communities. This approach, maybe not consciously articulated like this back then, but it aligns with what G.C. Argan later proposed in 1954, that urbanism, rather than architecture, should be at the head of the design hierarchy.
Urbanism over architecture.
Moses implicitly operated on that principle decades earlier. He saw individual buildings as just components within a grander utilitarian system. He wasn't really interested in individual architectural statements. His focus was always on the grand sweep, the overall design of the city.
So he wasn't just designing specific structures. He was acting almost like a city-scale surgeon, making cuts and additions to the entire urban organism.
That's a great way to put it, exactly. His projects were monumental, almost evoking the political and administrative genius of the Romans, as Viollet-le-Duc put it, where the monument itself, like Trajan's Column, was, in fact, a senatus consultum, a statement of state power and vision.
Not just a building, but a declaration.
Right. These weren't just roads or parks. They were tangible declarations of a new urban order. He built bridges spanning entire waterways, like the Triborough, highways carving through boroughs like the infamous Cross-Bronx Expressway, vast public parks like Jones Beach, public housing blocks reshaping entire neighborhoods, imposing this unified, if often harsh, aesthetic.
The scale is just staggering.
It is. You can see historical parallels, maybe, and things like Brunelleschi's dome in Florence, designed not just as engineering, but to emblazon the skyline with the city's ultimate symbol, a statement of civic power.
Right.
Or under Louis XIV, the Grand Gallery along the Seine, creating that superb vista of Baroque scale, as Kostoff describes it. Moses aimed for a similar civic transformation, where his works weren't just functional, but symbols of a powerful, unified vision for the city, dictating its very flow and future.
He thought big, not just buildings, but the very flow and function of the city, its arteries, its lungs, like you said. It sounds like he saw the city itself as a giant machine to be optimized.
Precisely. It was an all-encompassing top-down approach. Efficiency and grandeur were paramount, and the individual components, whether buildings or people, were expected to adapt to the larger machine.
One of his most defining contributions, and certainly one of the most visible even today, was the parkway system. How did these parkways transform the urban landscape? What was their underlying philosophy beyond just moving cars faster?
Oh, the parkway was a truly revolutionary concept, not just an evolution of the road. It fundamentally altered the relationship between traffic, nature, and urban development. Its core function, as explained in Space, Time, and Architecture, was to separate the intermingled functions of vehicular and pedestrian traffic.
Get the cars away from the people.
Exactly. It was a direct response to what was seen as the chaotic state of the cities, the abolition of the Rue Corridor, that traditional, often cramped city street with heavy traffic running right between houses, shops, homes, spilling onto sidewalks. Moses wanted to pull the vehicle out of that chaos.
So creating dedicated, streamlined pathways for cars, separate from where people lived and walked and did business. A clear separation of functions.
Yes, and crucially, these parkways were conceived as part of its surroundings, as a part of nature, not just isolated tracts of asphalt.
So landscaped.
Hmm.
Scenic.
Supposedly.
Yeah.
They weren't just utilitarian strips. They were designed with sweeping curves, scenic overlooks, landscaped borders, an attempt to integrate massive infrastructure with a curated natural environment. They were meant to be beautiful drives.
Okay.
But the control Moses exerted went far beyond the road itself.
Yeah.
Critically, regulations govern all construction along its borders, limiting the number of gas stations, restricting them to side roads, prohibiting all residences, business houses, factories.
Whoa. So he controlled not just the road, but everything you saw or didn't see along the way. That's audacious. Did that level of control spark outrage? Or was it just accepted as the price for efficient movement?
Surprisingly, for the most part, it seems it was accepted. The sources state that property owners have learned that their civil rights are not infringed when they are not allowed direct access to the parkway, and recognize its usefulness in a wider sense to them as well as to the community.
Huh. So people bought into the idea of the greater good. Efficiency trumped individual access.
It seems so. There was this widespread public buy-in for efficiency and order, even if it meant losing some individual access or property rights. The emphasis was on streamlined mobility and a pleasant, uninterrupted driving experience. This philosophy, it really reflects that modern movement approach in architecture and planning, focusing on the functional streak, as Kostov calls it, where the main goal was often efficiency, rational order, separating urban functions above all else.
So a grand vision for mobility, moving people and cars efficiently, but also this powerful new way of dictating what could and couldn't exist along these new arteries, creating these controlled, almost curated experiences of the urban landscape. A complete top-down vision from the biggest bridge to the smallest roadside detail.
Exactly. It was about imposing a singular vision of how the city should function, and then building the physical and even the regulatory infrastructure to enforce that vision. It offered this kind of idealized, unhindered movement, but, as we'll see, at a cost.
Right, the cost. While Moses's projects were undeniably efficient, transformative, bringing this new modernity and connectivity, they often came at a significant human price. We can't talk about his legacy without addressing these profound, often devastating costs. What were those trade-offs, especially for the communities he reshaped?
The trade-offs were immense, and primarily borne by the people whose lives just happened to be in the path of his grand plans. Moses's methods led to mass displacement on a staggering scale. His projects displaced hundreds of thousands of people
Hundreds of thousands.
and cleaved through established neighborhoods. We're not talking about minor inconveniences here. These were wholesale obliterations of homes, businesses, social networks that had often existed for generations.
Just wiped off the map.
Pretty much. And this stands in such stark contrast to how things are supposed to work today. Contemporary construction management standards. They strongly advocate for public relations, community outreach, and buy-in as essential, non-negotiable parts of projects.
Right, that's standard practice now.
Moses operated in an era, and frankly, by his own will, where those considerations were just not prioritized, if they were considered at all. The human fabric of the city was secondary to the engineering imperative.
So it wasn't just moving people physically, it was destroying the fabric of their lives, their connections, their sense of home, often without adequate compensation or real alternatives. The human element was indeed secondary.
That's precisely it. The impact on communities was often just overwhelming, and the consequences were often dismissed as an unavoidable, almost natural part of progress. There's this chilling analogy you can draw from A Critic Writes, which talks about an inundation after heavy rain where the authorities emphasize that the causes are purely natural.
Blaming nature.
Right. It's a parallel for how large-scale projects can have these devastating consequences that are presented as somehow inevitable or naturalized, even if they're entirely man-made and the authorities minimize them. For the residents displaced by Moses's projects, the destruction probably felt as overwhelming as a natural disaster, but it was entirely created by policy and bulldozers.
And this kind of disruption wasn't entirely new in history, was it? This idea of large-scale change creating social inequality and upheaval.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
You see historical echoes in the rapid, often harsh development of mill and factory towns during the industrial era. Kostov talks about this in History of Architecture. These new towns built around industry, they dwarfed the neighboring colonial villages and led to mean shanties being thrown up for immigrant labor, created significant social stratification, poor living conditions. Moses, operating in a modern context, kind of continued this pattern, prioritizing economic and infrastructural changes while often overlooking or actively disrupting the existing social order and the well-being of the people living there. He saw existing communities, especially poorer ones, often as just obstacles to be removed for the greater good of his vision.
The episode description mentions this uncomfortable best practice lesson, that great projects can be completed through means that are ethically questionable. Can you elaborate on how the sources really show these ethical quandaries in his execution?
Yeah, this is a crucial and uncomfortable point. The sources highlight how Moses's ambition, his relentless drive for efficiency, often allowed him to just bypass concerns for individual rights and transparent processes, things we now recognize as fundamental ethical components of public works.
Things we take for granted, hopefully.
Hopefully. Today's construction management, you look at the CMAA standards, or Construction Management Jumpstart. They explicitly emphasize things like quality control and safety management, managing risk, sustainability reviews, documented cost management. These are explicit protocols, ethical guidelines designed to protect all stakeholders and the environment.
Right. Checks and balances.
Moses's era just had fewer explicit protocols like that. And crucially, he exploited that vacuum. It gave him far more unilateral decision-making power.
So a lot of what we consider standard practice now, ethical accountability, community engagement, environmental impact studies, it simply didn't exist in the same way or wasn't enforced back then. he operated in a very different landscape.
Exactly. And furthermore, modern contracts emphasize the importance of get it in writing for changes, for extensions, as discussed in project management and construction. It ensures transparency, accountability, fair dealing.
Makes sense.
Moses, though, he operated through that system of leveraging personal favors and keeping those infamous files on politicians. The method described in The Power Broker as being able to destroy you with it.
The files again.
Yeah. That illustrates these ethically dubious pressure tactics operating entirely outside formalized, transparent processes. It was a system built on personal loyalty and fear, not open governance or democratic principles. He valued achieving his vision far more than the process by which it was achieved.
And for Moses, it really felt like the ends justified the means. The grand project, the sweeping vision, always came first, didn't it?
That seems to be the core tension in his legacy. Samuel Florman, in The Existential Pleasures of Engineering, notes the duty of engineers is for the use and convenience of man. But he also acknowledges that environmental dangers are inherent in every technological advance, and that, well, we cannot build highways or canals or airports without despoiling the landscape.
A necessary evil in that view.
Perhaps. That philosophical grounding helps us understand the inherent conflict Moses faced, and he often resolved it decisively in favor of the project. He viewed the societal disruptions, the ethical compromises, the environmental changes as an unavoidable cost of progress, a necessary despoiling for the greater use and convenience of man, as he defined it. He was a man utterly convinced of his own rightness, and that conviction allowed him to override almost any objection.
So the drive to build on that grand scale, to impose that singular, powerful vision, often meant that the nuanced ethical landscape was just flattened along with entire neighborhoods. It's a powerful lesson in the potential dark side of unchecked ambition, even when it's fueled by a belief in public good.
A very powerful one indeed. It makes us question the very definition of progress when it's achieved through means like that. And it forces us to confront the fact that monumental achievements can indeed have a profoundly human and sometimes tragic cost.
Now, the story of the Power Broker wouldn't be complete without talking about the fundamental clash of urban ideas that emerged from Moses's reign, most famously embodied by Jane Jacobs. What does she stand for? And how did her vision directly challenge Moses's top-down, grand-scale approach? It feels like a truly seismic shift in urban thinking.
Oh, absolutely seismic. And while Jane Jacobs isn't explicitly named in all our source excerpts, her philosophy is vividly represented. The concept of vibrant, dense, mixed-use communities, that was a direct, profound counterpoint to Moses's large-scale, functionalist urban renewal.
Functionalists,
Yeah.
separating everything out.
Exactly. Whereas Jacobs, in her seminal work, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, argued forcefully that areas like Boston's North End, despite having much the highest dwelling densities, were paradoxically the city's healthiest areas.
More dense, but healthier.
Right. She contrasted this sharply with what she saw as overcrowded slums of American real life, which were often more and more, typically, dull areas with a low density of dwellings. Her core argument was that these low-density, uniform developments, when they get swallowed into a city and its ordinary problems,
Yeah.
they possess no city vitality to contend with these problems.
They lack resilience.
Precisely. She valued the complex, interwoven urban life, the spontaneous street-level interactions, the organic density, the very things Moses's projects frequently destroyed in favor of highways and isolated towers and parks.
So on one side, you have this vision of the city as a grand, efficient machine designed from the top down for cars and large-scale flow. And on the other, the city as a living, breathing ecosystem of human connections where the messy vitality of street life and genuine community was paramount. It's almost a philosophical battle for the soul of the city, isn't it?
It really is. You look at someone like Le Corbusier, his vision of a city of towers, 60 stories high, 700 feet, spaced far apart just for business.
Right, the sterile office park idea.
And his candid admission that family life would hardly be at home in them. That reflects the kind of grand, separated, purely functional zones Moses favored. And this vision starkly contrasts with the ideas Jacobs championed, and also with the historical evolution of domesticity, privacy, comfort, the concept of the home and of the family as principal achievements of the modern age, which Wintertold Rubczynski traces in Home. A short history of an idea.
So Moses was overlooking the home part.
His focus on grand scale and vehicular efficiency often overlooked or actively suppressed that essential human dimension of urban living, the very concept of home and local belonging that Jacob celebrated.
And this philosophical battle, it extended to the architecture itself, didn't it? Someone like Frank Lloyd Wright, with his focus on integration with nature and human needs. He would have been diametrically opposed to Moses. Oh, absolutely. Frank Lloyd Wright's organic architecture philosophy, seeking a harmonious integration of human dwellings with their natural surroundings, emphasizing truth, beauty, and a response to the environment and human needs, that stands as a direct philosophical counterargument to Moses's often brutalist, disruptive projects.
Brutalist is a good word for some of them.
Right. Criticize superficiality. He emphasized that architecture should be a genuine expression of life, not just decorative forms. This focus on genuine expression, human scale, local context, environmental harmony. It was fundamentally at odds with Moses's drive for efficiency and monumental, often universal impact, which frequently resulted in destroying existing human habitats and natural landscapes. Wright believed in building from the site, not just imposing on it.
Right, a completely different philosophy.
Yeah.
But before Jacobs became such a prominent public voice of resistance, were there others? People who challenged Moses's burgeoning power and methods earlier on. This couldn't have been a sudden awakening for everyone. Surely there were earlier attempts to curb his influence. You're right, there was indeed earlier resistance. And one of the most significant early clashes came during the Brooklyn Battery Crossing debate. This marked the definitive end of Moses's long alliance with New York's good government movement, the very reformers he'd once marched alongside as a young man.
The good government guys turned on him. Why?
Well, the identity of the two men who led the opposition to his proposed Brooklyn Battery Bridge really spotlights this profound ideological confrontation he created.
Okay, who are these early challengers, figures from that movement who eventually opposed their former ally?
One of the most notable was George McCannany. Ironically, he was one of the heroes of Moses's own youth, an early crusader for civil service reform, a figure of such high moral standing that Adolph Ochs of the New York Times appointed him as executive manager to act as a sort of moral background for the paper.
Wow, high praise.
Absolutely. McCannany had this distinguished history of advocating for city planning. He was the moving force behind the first comprehensive zoning plan in the U.S. He even worked amicably with Moses back in 1935, deliberating over the location for the World's Fair. Apparently, Moses even thumped the desk and exclaimed, "By God, that is a great idea," about one of McCannany's suggestions.
So there were allies once. What changed?
What changed was Moses, his methods, his increasing arrogance, perhaps. This earlier camaraderie highlights just how much Moses evolved or hardened. Even initial allies, people of impeccable civic reputation like McCannany, became fierce opponents when Moses's projects and methods became too overbearing or destructive, as they clearly did with the Brooklyn Battery Crossing. McCannany championed a tunnel, not Moses's bridge, arguing vehemently against the bridge's impact on Battery Park and Lower Manhattan.
So this wasn't just about a bridge or a park. It was about those fundamental values of urban development and public accountability that Moses was increasingly just ignoring, an early, significant sign of the discord to come.
Precisely. It demonstrated that even those who initially supported his vision or efficiency couldn't reconcile themselves with the increasingly autocratic and destructive means he employed. The battle over the Brooklyn Battery Crossing really foreshadowed the larger conflicts over human-scale urbanism versus Moses's monumental engineering conflicts that Jane Jacobs would famously champion in the decades that followed. It marked a turning point where his means began to seriously overshadow his perceived good intentions for many people.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive into Robert Moses and the power broker, what broader, enduring lessons can we draw from this era? Lessons about large-scale projects, urban development, things that are still incredibly relevant today as our cities keep growing and changing.
Well, the Moses era offers invaluable lessons, especially when we adopt a systems perspective. When we understand cities as these complex, interconnected entities.
Systems thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Understanding system dynamics, as Donella Meadows laid out so profoundly in Thinking in Systems, teaches us that the least obvious part of the system, its function or purpose, is often the most crucial determinant of the system's behavior.
The underlying purpose drives everything.
Exactly. Moses's primary purpose, the rapid completion of grand, efficient infrastructure, had these cascading, often unforeseen, and deeply negative effects on other vital parts of the urban system. Things like established communities, local businesses, social networks. These effects were long-lasting, profoundly disruptive. It highlights how a singular, narrowly defined purpose can unintentionally harm the broader system.
So his laser focus on one goal, like moving cars efficiently, inadvertently created these ripple effects that he either didn't anticipate or maybe more likely just chose to ignore in his relentless pursuit of his vision.
I suspect more the latter, but yes. The text also powerfully warns against false boundaries and bounded rationality,
Hmm.
and the critical need to take into account limiting factors, nonlinearities, and delays.
Things don't always go according to the simple plan.
Not in complex systems, no. Moses, in his relentless drive for speed and scale, often ignored these systemic considerations. He pushed through projects with a singular vision, which, yes, achieved monumental physical transformation, but ultimately led to long-term social, economic, environmental problems that were either unintended or just dismissed as collateral damage. It also evokes Louis Sullivan's poignant observation again, realizing that the fair-appearing civilization was but a huge invisible man-trap, man-made. Sullivan's soul returned with an appalling message about man's betrayal by man on a colossal scale.
Wow.
That philosophical lens helps us view the systemic harm caused by unbridled power and a narrowly defined purpose. It underscores that the consequences outlive the original builder.
It's a powerful reminder. Every action in a complex urban system has ripple effects, some we might not see or fully understand for decades. The consequences outlive the builder, sometimes for generations. A profound lesson in interconnectedness.
Absolutely. The long-term behavior of a system is often determined by the interplay of its elements, interconnections, and purposes. Moses' approach privileged certain elements and purposes, like highways and speed, while neglecting crucial interconnections and their long-term implications for human communities. We're still living with some of those consequences today, definitely.
Given those profound pitfalls of the power broker era, how do contemporary approaches to urban planning and construction aim to avoid these kinds of outcomes? What have we as a society, as professions like planning and engineering, learned from figures like Robert Moses?
Well, hopefully quite a lot. Today, there's a strong conscious emphasis on integrating diverse perspectives, fostering sustainability, and empowering local communities, often leveraging new technologies to achieve these goals.
Like what kind of technologies?
Modern construction relies heavily on tools like building information modeling, or BIM. Think of it as creating a comprehensive digital twin of a project.
A digital twin.
Yeah. It encompasses not just 3D parametric modeling, which allows for flexible, intelligent design changes and visualizations, but also 4D schedules, linking construction sequences to time, and 5D cost management, integrating the budget with every design element. The BIM Handbook and CMAA standards describe these not just as software, but as platforms for unprecedented collaboration and foresight.
Okay, so much more integrated planning.
Exactly. It facilitates clash detection, finding where pipes might hit beams virtually before it happens on site, and engineering analysis. This allows for integrated team approaches, helping achieve value and get it right the first time by identifying and resolving design problems virtually, fostering intense collaboration among all disciplines.
So a monumental shift then, from a single dictatorial vision to a highly collaborative, data-driven, transparent process where potential issues can be identified and addressed much earlier. That sounds like a direct response, the kind of unilateral decision-making Moses was known for.
It really is. We also see the widespread adoption of lean practices and pole planning, highlighted in guides for lean research. These advocate for the involvement of specialist suppliers in design and significant early community engagement to improve workflow reliability and project outcomes.
Community engagement, the opposite of Moses.
A direct contrast to his top-down imposition. Furthermore, there's been a profound shift in values towards environmental responsibility and long-term sustainability. Sustainable construction highlights the increased demand for buildings that are resource efficient, that use minimal energy and water, leading to high-performance green buildings and ambitious targets like net zero energy or net zero water.
Concepts completely alien to Moses' time.
Entirely absent. These emphasize environmental stewardship, long-term ecological balance, seeing projects as part of a larger planetary system, not just an isolated human endeavor.
And it sounds like there's even a movement to empower communities directly in the design and creation of their environments, making them active participants, not just passive recipients.
Yes, and this is a truly radical departure from the top-down imposition. The Fab Lab movement, discussed in Designing Reality and the City of Tomorrow, promotes local user-centric production. It empowers communities to modify or hack the world around them and locally design and produce solutions to local problems, using accessible digital fabrication tools.
So people can make their own solutions.
Right. It fosters an open infrastructure that turns community members into makers and becomes the center for sharing knowledge, creating, and socializing. It's a move away from the single master builder, imposing his will, towards a collective master community actively shaping its own future. Driven by accessible technology and a new ethos of local empowerment, shared knowledge, and truly democratic design.
So, a profound evolution. From a single master builder imposing his will to potentially a collective master community actively shaping its own future. Driven by technology and this new, more inclusive ethos championing human scale, collaboration, environmental responsibility. It's almost like the pendulum has swung decisively in the opposite direction from the Moses era. We've explored the extraordinary ambition of Robert Moses, the undeniable political genius behind his power, the monumental scale of his vision for New York, and, well, the profound, often devastating human cost of his methods. We've seen how a single, unelected individual could fundamentally reshape a city, prioritizing efficiency in the automobile, and how this ultimately led to fierce resistance from those who championed a more human-scale urbanism.
This deep dive into the power broker is, in many ways, a profound cautionary tale about the nature of power itself and the immense responsibility that comes with building our world. It starkly reveals that uncomfortable best practice lesson that great projects can indeed be completed through means that are ethically questionable.
It forces us to look closer.
It forces us to constantly weigh those trade-offs between public good and individual rights inherent in large-scale urban development. It really challenges us to look beyond the impressive concrete and steel to the human stories, the ethical compromises beneath, and to consider the long-term systemic consequences of our choices.
It leaves us with a question for you, our listener, to consider. In your own communities, what balances are being struck today? Are we building cities primarily for cars or for people? And perhaps most importantly, who truly holds the power in shaping the places we call home, and how accountable are they? Is the satisfaction of seeing the machine jump through the hoop, as engineers might describe it, in the existential pleasures of engineering, always worth the unseen costs to community and individual well-being? Think about it and look closely at the forces shaping your own urban landscape.